Imagine a single missing air monitor. Like on paper, it sounds like a minor clerical error.
Right. Just a broken sensor on a fence somewhere.
Exactly, just a piece of plastic and wire.
Yeah.
But today, we're looking at how that one missing piece of equipment might be the linchpin in a massive chain reaction, a reaction that triggered a 90% stock market crash.
Which is huge.
Right, and it sparked an international scientific feud over a chemical that is likely sitting in your house right now and ignited a public health emergency down in Brazil.
It is, well, it's a phenomenal example of how fragile, massive industrial systems really are. You pull one thread of regulatory data, and suddenly the entire fabric of a multi-million-dollar operation just starts to unravel.
Yeah, completely unravels.
I mean, we are looking at a situation that crosses local environmental law, microscopic human biology, and, global financial markets.
And that is our mission for you today. We are taking a custom-tailored deep dive into an ongoing, highly complex crisis unfolding in the coastal communities of Camaçari, Bahia, in Brazil.
Specifically, this revolves around a massive chemical facility.
Right, the Tronox Pigmentos factory.
Yeah.
And of course, the residents living right next door to it. Now, because our source material deals with intense legal battles, angry communities, and a corporation literally fighting for its financial life, we need to set the ground rules right up front.
Yeah, that's crucial.
Neither of us here is taking a side. We aren't endorsing the claims of the local community, the government, or the company.
Our sole job is to unpack the facts, the allegations, and the underlying science from the sources we've been given. We are here to help you understand the mechanics of this crisis, not to play judge or jury.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand how a company loses 90% of its value, you can't start on the stock exchange floor. You have to start in the dirt.
Right down at the ground level.
Yeah, the physical ground level in communities named Areias, Joá, and Tucunaré, which sit right on the northern coast of Camaçari. And the central tension here starts with a timeline that honestly defies belief. 13 years.
13 years of waiting. To put that in perspective, the State Public Prosecutor's Office in Bahia, the MPBA, signed a legally binding agreement with this factory back in 2012 and 2013.
So over a decade ago.
Exactly. In Brazilian law, it's a conduct adjustment term, or TEC. It's a commitment where a company essentially says, we acknowledge there are operational issues, and we promise to fix them to comply with environmental standards.
So it's a formal promise to clean up your act to avoid getting shut down.
Yes. But according to the sources, the enforcement of that agreement has just languished in a state of regulatory limbo for over a decade.
Wow.
And while the lawyers and bureaucrats have been, kicking the can down the road, the physical environment around the factory hasn't hit pause.
Not at all. The state prosecutor's own technical support center recently issued a report that is quite alarming. They pointed out that the factory's primary physical containment systems are actively failing.
Yeah, the basic physical barriers.
Right. The facility relies on hydraulic barriers and massive windbreaks to keep its industrial byproducts contained, but the report says those barriers are entirely insufficient.
They're just not working.
No. Heavy metals, things like iron, aluminum, manganese, and nickel, lead, cobalt, and even chromium. They're allegedly migrating directly into the soil and, more importantly, into the local water table.
And we're also talking about nanoparticles here.
Yes, nanoparticles. I was actually trying to visualize this while reading the sources, and it just struck me. Relying on a physical windbreak to stop airborne nanoparticles is basically like trying to use a chain link fence to hold back a sandstorm.
That's a great way to put it.
Like you can build that fence 50 feet high, but the particles are so infinitesimally small they just ride the air currents right through the gaps.
Yeah.
It seems to defy the basic physics of what a barrier is designed to do.
Well, what's fascinating here is the fluid dynamics of it. You are entirely right. A windbreak is a macro-level solution being applied to a nano-level problem. Nanoparticles are governed by different physical rules. They don't just drop to the ground like a pebble. They can stay suspended in the air for extended periods, drifting miles on the coastal winds.
Which is terrifying for the people living nearby.
And the situation is compounded by a detail in the sources that changes the entire complexion of this crisis. The toxicological monitoring equipment that was supposed to track this airborne drift, the sensors placed in the community, they have been removed.
That is the part that stopped me in my tracks. They didn't just break rank. They were removed. So the factory, the regulators, and the community are essentially operating in the dark.
Completely in the dark.
How does a state environmental agency, INEMA, in this case, even begin to process the renewal of a factory's operation license when the actual data collection tools have vanished.
They can't, at least not credibly. If we connect this to the bigger picture, removing those monitors creates a dangerous void of accountability.
Because there's no proof either way.
Exactly. When you lack continuous toxicological data, you lose the baseline of truth. The company can't definitively prove the air is safe, and the community struggles to definitively prove it isn't. It leaves the licensing process paralyzed.
But the community isn't paralyzed. The coastal wind isn't waiting for a new sensor to be installed. That wind is blowing industrial dust right into these neighborhoods, which means we need to talk about exactly what is in that dust.
Right, the chemical makeup.
And that brings us to the science of titanium dioxide, or TiO2.
Yeah.
This isn't some rare exotic chemical, right?
Not at all. Think about the last time you painted a wall white, or applied sunscreen, or honestly even ate certain powdered pastries.
Wait, pastries?
Yeah, for decades, titanium dioxide has been a remarkably common chemical compound used globally as a white pigment. But the international scientific community has recently fractured over its safety profile.
And the sources highlight a massive international divide here. Let's look at Europe. In 2022, the European Food Safety Authority, the EFSA, conducted a massive review and outright banned TiO2 as a food additive across the entire European Union.
Yes, they found it has genotoxic potential.
Okay, genotoxic potential. That sounds bad, but what does it actually mean?
This is a crucial concept to understand. Genotoxicity doesn't just mean something makes you sick. It means the substance has the potential to directly damage or mutate the DNA within your cells.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. The mechanism at play with nanoparticles often involves oxidative stress. These particles are so small they can penetrate cellular walls, generating reactive oxygen species that essentially snip or alter the DNA strands inside.
Okay, I have to push back here for a second, because the sources also explicitly mentioned that the Brazilian Health Authority, Anvisa, currently maintains conservative parameters that still allow for the ingestion of titanium dioxide.
Right. It is still legal in Brazil as a food additive.
So if the local health authority says eating it in certain amounts is fine, why are the community groups using a European food ban to argue against a factory's operating license? Aren't we comparing apples and oranges?
That is exactly the counter-argument you'd expect to hear, but it misses the fundamental biology of how human bodies interact with toxins. The threat to the Areias community is not about ingestion.
It's not.
No, it is entirely about inhalation.
Ah, because the lungs don't process foreign bodies the way the stomach does.
Think about the evolutionary design of your digestive tract. When you swallow something, it hits a highly acidic stomach environment designed to break down foreign substances and bacteria. The stomach lining is incredibly tough.
Right.
But your lungs, the lungs are essentially millions of delicate microscopic air sacs called alveoli designed for one thing, gas exchange. The barrier between the air you breathe and your bloodstream in the lungs is incredibly thin.
So when you inhale nanoparticles of industrial waste, you bypass the stomach's defenses completely.
Precisely. And this is where the International Agency for Research on Cancer, the IRRC, steps in. They classify titanium dioxide as a Group 2B possible carcinogen for humans.
But specifically through inhalation.
Specifically and only through the inhalation route. The community's denunciation points out that the coastal winds are acting as a delivery mechanism, taking this localized industrial product and depositing it directly onto the local vegetation and into the air the residents breathe 24 hours a day.
And if it's genotoxic, like the European study suggests, that changes the math on what constitutes a safe amount to breathe, right?
It changes the math completely. In toxicology, when a substance is proven to cause DNA mutation, the general scientific consensus is that there is no safe threshold of exposure.
You can't just have a little bit of it.
Exactly. You can't just say, well, a few parts per million is fine. Any exposure carries a statistical risk of cellular mutation. That biological reality is the core argument driving the community's demand to block the factory's license indefinitely.
Which means we need to shift our focus from the microscopic level to the human level. When regulatory barriers fail and potentially genotoxic dust blows through the air, someone actually pays the price.
And the local residents are the ones paying it.
Right. And according to the sources, the community living next to this factory is not taking this quietly.
They are heavily mobilized. We are seeing grassroots organizations stepping into the regulatory void, groups like the Asociación de Areias, and a movement calling itself A Voz de Areias, the voice of Areias.
They're getting organized.
Very organized. They are actively forcing the state government and the judiciary to wake up from what the sources describe as institutional passivity.
Well, if the official monitors are gone, the community becomes the monitor. And the health repercussions they are documenting are grim.
Very grim.
The sources outline visible changes in the color of the local drinking water, thick episodes of atmospheric pollution, and a perceptible, accumulated increase in serious illnesses over the years. We're talking about cancerous tumors, chronic respiratory issues, and severe kidney pathologies.
And then there is the most alarming data point in the provided materials. Over the last 2 months, a significantly large number of deaths have been recorded in the community.
Yeah, I read that.
But the official causes of death are not being disclosed.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate for a second here. An unexplained spike in mortality is terrifying, absolutely. But without the medical data, couldn't that be attributed to something else?
Like what?
Like, I don't know, an aging population, a sudden lack of local medical resources, or an unrelated virus? Correlation isn't always causation. How do we know it's the factory?
We don't, and that is exactly why the community is so outraged. When a population is already living in fear of environmental contamination from an adjacent factory, a spike in unexplained mortality creates absolute panic.
It breeds deep distrust.
It does. By failing to disclose the causes of death, the authorities are fueling the exact kind of terror that a transparent public health system is supposed to prevent.
It's the ultimate consequence of operating in the dark. You remove the environmental sensors, you withhold the medical data, and you leave people guessing about why their neighbors are dying.
Which is why the community's legal strategy is so compelling. They aren't waiting for a 20-year epidemiological study to definitively prove causality.
They don't have time for that.
Exactly. They are putting immense pressure on the Health Secretariat, CESUP, and Divisa to enact emergency procedures based on a legal and scientific concept called the precautionary principle.
I love this concept. Let's break this down for the listener. The precautionary principle basically flips the script on how we handle risk. Usually, if I want to stop you from doing something, I have to prove that your actions are harming me.
Right, the burden of proof is on the victim.
But under this principle, if your action has a suspected risk of causing severe harm to the public, the burden of proof is on you to prove that it is perfectly safe.
It is protective mandate. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it asks a fundamental societal question: who gets the benefit of the doubt, the corporation or public health?
It's like you don't have to prove the gun is loaded before you tell someone to stop pointing it at you. The person holding the gun has to prove it's empty.
That's a powerful analogy.
The community is saying, given the international cancer warnings for inhaled titanium dioxide and given the visible pollution in our water, you must apply the precautionary principle and shut the machines down until you can prove the dust is safe.
And that legal maneuvering is incredibly effective because it doesn't just put pressure on politicians. It puts pressure on the one thing a corporation cares about more than anything else: its valuation.
Oh man, here's where it gets really interesting. Because you cannot have a 13-year regulatory mess, international scientific scrutiny, and a deeply mobilized, litigious community without the financial markets taking notice.
Markets hate uncertainty.
Investors are notoriously allergic to drama. So what does this all mean for the company's bottom line?
Well, the socio-environmental realities on the ground have bled directly into the financial ledgers, and the bleeding is severe.
The numbers in the sources are brutal. Let's look at the Brazilian B3 exchange. Tronox Pigmentos shares, traded under the tickers CRPG5 and CRPG6, have absolutely cratered.
Cratered is the right word.
Just 2 years ago, those shares were trading at over 115 reais. Today, they are languishing between 12 and 13 reais. That is well below even their 52-week high of 23. We are looking at nearly a 90% destruction of shareholder value.
What's fascinating here is the mechanics of that market collapse. The sources note the stock is suffering from extremely low liquidity.
Let's define liquidity for a second because it's crucial. High liquidity means you can buy or sell a stock instantly because there are millions of people trading it.
Right, a busy marketplace.
But low liquidity means if you own 1,000 shares and you want to sell them right now to cut your losses, there is literally nobody on the other end of the phone willing to buy them from you. You are trapped in the asset.
And why is no one willing to buy? Because institutional investors look at this factory and they don't see a chemical plant anymore. They see a black hole of unquantifiable socio-environmental liability.
It's the uncertainty again.
Exactly. Wall Street, or in this case, the B3 exchange in Sao Paulo, can price in a known fine. If a company owes a $10 million penalty, the stock adjusts and investors move on.
They just write it off as a cost of doing business.
But you cannot price in the unknown. When an investor sees missing environmental data, a mobilized community, shrinking operating margins, and the possibility that an entire facility might be stripped of its operating license and shut down indefinitely, they flee. The risk becomes unmanageable.
And local media is acting as an accelerant to that fire. The sources mention regional programs, right? Like Programmer Cantado de Radio on Leader FM, Metro One, and General Atard. They're consistently amplifying the community's complaints.
It creates this vicious feedback loop.
Yeah, the public pressure forces the government to take legal action, which generates more media coverage, which in turn scares away even more investors, driving the stock price further into the ground.
And the institutional passivity the community has been fighting for a decade, it is finally fracturing.
Yeah.
The state public prosecutor is no longer letting that 2012 agreement just sit in a drawer.
They're finally moving on it.
Yes. They are now issuing strict, consecutive 15-day deadlines for the company to provide independent third-party reports on their emissions and effluents.
A 15-day deadline from a prosecutor is no joke. That is the legal equivalent of having a spotlight shined right in your eyes.
It signals the end of the open-ended grace period. The state environmental agency is now caught in a vice. They can't just quietly rubber stamp an operating license renewal when the prosecutor is publicly demanding hard data on an aggressive timeline.
But the community isn't even leaving it up to the state prosecutor anymore. The sources detail the ultimate escalation. The Residents Association of Areias is currently preparing a civil public action, and they are bringing in the absolute heavyweights.
I really are.
They have secured representation from the Federal Public Prosecutor's Office, the MPF, alongside the local public defender's office.
This raises an important question about jurisdiction and power. When the federal public prosecutor steps into the arena, the entire scale of the litigation transforms.
It's no longer just a local issue.
Right. This is no longer a localized dispute over a municipal zoning license. It elevates into a federal question of fundamental environmental and human rights. A federal civil public action possesses the legal teeth to compel massive systemic operational changes, enforce exorbitant company-breaking fines, or, as the residents are demanding, indefinitely suspend the factory's right to operate altogether.
It is the ultimate collision of everything we've unpacked today. So to bring this entire deep dive full circle for you, we started by looking at a failure to enforce a 13-year-old regulatory promise.
A very long delay.
Yeah, that bureaucratic delay allowed for the physical breakdown of environmental barriers, essentially trying to hold back a nanoparticle sandstorm with a chain-link fence. The removal of local air monitors created a data blackout, allowing airborne titanium dioxide, a compound flagged internationally for genotoxic potential, to blanket a coastal community.
Which then sparked the health crisis.
Exactly. A terrifying, unexplained health crisis, prompting residents to invoke the precautionary principle. And ultimately, that combination of human suffering, legal mobilization, and regulatory chaos created a black box of liability that created a massive corporation stock value by nearly 90%.
It is a staggering domino effect. But, as we wrap up today's analysis, I want to leave you with one final lingering thought to explore on your own.
Go for it.
Our sources are heavily focused on the immediate, desperate fight to hold this specific factory accountable right now. But play the tape forward. If the socio-environmental liabilities continue to balloon and the stock price stays completely decimated because of low liquidity, what happens if this actually drives the company into total bankruptcy?
That's a scary thought.
If the corporation dissolves, what happens to the contaminated land? Does a corporate financial collapse mean that the public and that very same suffering local community are ultimately left holding the bill for the environmental cleanup?
That is a heavy, systemic question. It's the old adage of privatizing the profits and socializing the losses. When the legal battles end and the corporate entities vanish, someone still has to clean up the dirt. We want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive today. Keep reading, keep exploring, and most importantly, keep questioning the complex systems operating right in your own backyard, especially when you notice a missing piece of monitoring equipment. Have a great day.